My name's Dale Slusser. I'm going to try to stick close to my script so that we can get through. This presentation is on the river rock and the rock tradition of Montreat, the tour stones, or I call it reveling in rocks. And my articles and specialty that I studied was the river rock. But these are not all river rock on the tour. But you'll find out a little more through the script and through the presentation why they changed from river rock to bigger rock. The river rock and rock building tradition of Montreat. Montreat started in 1897 as a summer religious conference ground. Now, after 125 years, Montreat has evolved into an incorporated town within which lies not only the religious conference ground, but also a Christian liberal arts college, a Presbyterian heritage center, and among other separate entities, as well as several hundred homeowners. These homeowners and institutions all share a common heritage and tradition. And one of those shared traditions, which was spawned in the early 1920s during the administration of Dr. Robert C. Anderson, was and still is a tradition of using river rock and rock on their buildings, houses, bridges, retaining walls, fire pits, and fireplaces. I got a little ahead of myself. The Mountain Retreat Association began in 1897 as an interdenominational Christian retreat and conference center. In 1907, the Mountain Retreat Association and all its lands and facilities were purchased by the Presbyterian Church of the United States denomination. On August 11th, 1911, Reverend Robert C. Anderson, who had been instrumental in carrying out an earlier plan to erase the association's inherited debt and help Montreat to get onto a solid financial footing, was elected president. Following the First World War, the U.S. economy began to rise, culminating in the building boom of the roaring 1920s. So too, Reverend Anderson started to look to the future growth and development of Montreat. By 1919, the numbers of private owners building their own cottages at Montreat, as well as the increased conference and retreat attendees, were burgeoning, promoting the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, upon the recommendation of Dr. Anderson, to begin a capital campaign to raise $200,000 for the enlargement and better equipment of Montreat. Dr. Anderson was beginning his own building boom. Anderson's first focus was on replacing the old outdated wood frame auditorium. Just a note before I continue, I've tried to keep this presentation in order of the stops on the tour, but there are a few that I've put out of order, and the first one is the auditorium, and that's because the building of the auditorium basically was the start of the use of river rock and rock for the buildings of Montreat. And I'll try to remember to name the stop before I talk about it. So this is actually stop 12, the auditorium. Montreat Auditorium, costing about $10,000, is nearing completion, announced the July 11, 1921 edition of the Asheville Citizen Times. Besides the size of the auditorium, which was designed to seat 5,000, and its unique hexagon, a 16-sided polygon shape. A prominent and distinctive design element was its river rock clad round columns and exterior walls. The above mentioned article from 1921 gives a good description of the river rock finish. The reporter tells us that the exterior was, quote, finished in water-worn brookstones taken from streams on the mountainside near Montreat, which are laid in cement. Anderson had chosen Asheville's British-born architect, Richard Sharp Smith, to design the new auditorium. Besides the size of the new auditorium, which was designed to seat 5,000, and in its unique 16-sided shape, a prominent and distinctive design element was its river rock, both for the cladding and the round columns. Interestingly, the two notable features of the new auditorium, both the round columns and the use of river rock or cobblestones, were not part of the original design of the auditorium by Richard Sharp Smith. Yet both of these features would become a standard building pattern or tradition for Montreat buildings and landscape features. Reverend Anderson tells us how both features came to be part of the design. Quote, Mr. Smith first thought it best to have the building erected with Montreat stone blocks and to have the pillars designed built in a square form. But this type of stone rock at the time was too expensive. I employed local men and tested out the round column instead of the square to be erected with small cobblestones taken from the bed of the creek. The small columns with the large stone were estimated, the square columns with the large stone was estimated to cost about $35 a square yard. By actual test, we found that the round pillar could be built by using a round form and the small cobblestone at a cost of about $10 per square feet. So we decided to use this form for the structure of the columns, which now stand in the auditorium. This is a question I ask myself when I first started studying this. Why does Montreat have such an availability of rock or stone, especially river rock and cobblestone? The short answer is because of the type of rock upon which Montreat sits. Geologists who have surveyed and documented the local geology at and around Montreat tell us that Montreat's valley sits on a vein of conglomeratic beta-gray-wacky. Yes. I actually contacted a geologist who gave me this information. So, and it's a type of sedimentary rock that the slopes surrounding the valley consists mainly of. Also, they consist of garnet mica schist and undivided heterogeneous schist outcrops. Quote. The cobblestone used on the Montreat buildings and cottages are from the conglomeratic beta-gray-wacky stone, which is under and around the main creeks that flow into and throughout Montreat. Geologists tell us that the cobblestones used at Montreat are mostly mineral quartz, and not the less easily broken minerals like the micas and the metamorphic minerals kayanite, angelicite, and sillimanite, which would easily be broken up or dissolved in water in the creeks and riverbeds. However, the river rock cobblestones at Montreat do contain some of these other minerals, but because the minerals in the conglomeratic beta-gray-wacky at Montreat have metamorphosed such that the metamorphism has caused the preferred texture or foliation to the rock, resulting in the unequal weathering the broken fragments of the rock when tumbled by the stream. The metamorphism of the minerals is akin to the hardening of iron to make steel, which makes for a stronger material. The other type of rock, the garnet mica schist, was also used for buildings at Montreat later in the 1930s and 40s as the supply of local river rock diminished. They're larger, flatter, and have sharp broken edges and are laid in a coarse rubble pattern. That's just a look at the geology around Montreat, and I believe that pinkish orange area is the metagraywacke and the garnet mica schist too. Anyhow, here's a picture of it. You can see there. It's got a lot of different minerals in it. Okay, the first stop on the tour is at the Montreat Gate. Whether it was originally intentional of R.C. Anderson or whether it just naturally developed as he continued his improvements is difficult to ascertain. However, the use of round columns and especially the use of cobblestones was quickly adopted as a distinctive design idiom for subsequent institutional buildings and landscape features at Montreat. After the construction of the auditorium, Anderson began other building projects, the next being the construction of a stone gatehouse and gate at the entrance to Montreat. Being an adroit fundraiser, Anderson was able to find donors, sometimes wealthy individuals, and sometimes a group of individuals to bankroll his various projects. In 1923, the Women's Auxiliary contributed $2,000 for the construction of the new gate and gatehouse. Not only was the gate and gatehouse constructed using cobblestones, but also the round cobblestone-clad columns designed by Anderson for use in the auditorium were also used on the four corners of the double arch gate. The next stop you'll be seeing is the cottage at 198 Mississippi Road, and it was stop number 2, and it was purchased by Billy and Ruth Graham in 1947. The house and lot were chosen by the Grahams because it was across the street from Ruth's parents, Dr. and Mrs. Nelson L. Bell. Actually, it's L. Nelson Bell, I believe. The Grahams extensively renovated and added on to the original 1907 cottage. One of the features of the Grahams' renovation was the installation of a curved glass window in the rear breakfast room. The window had been discarded by a downtown Asheville department store. The stone on the exterior, at least I believe, was no doubt added by the Grahams. The Grahams lived in the house until the 1950s, at which time they built a house on the top of the mountain for more privacy, to escape from the swarms of the busloads of tourists that became a troubling nuisance to the Grahams and their Montreat neighbors. The house was just recently sold out of the Graham family. This is just a side, but this makes me remember that one time I heard Anne Graham Lotz talking about when she was a kid, she said they could kind of tell what the denomination was of the visitors. She said the Episcopalians would drive by and not even really look. The Presbyterians would kind of slow down and maybe just look over a little bit. And the Methodists would stop and maybe roll down the windows. And she said the Baptists would always stop the car and get out. Stop number 3 is the Old President's Lodge, or what's left of it. Although the use of river rock at Montreat started in 1921 with the building of the auditorium, the use of rock for foundations and fireplaces at Montreat predates 1921. Not necessarily the cobblestones, but using stones. There really aren't any stone houses, complete stone houses, but they use the stone a lot for fireplaces and some foundations. One example is the former president's house that actually predates the founding of Montreat in 1897. Thought to have been built by a sheep herder, Montreat's land was purchased from a large sheep herding business. The house was a log house, which was first used by J.C. Collins, the first president of Montreat. Rock was used on the front porch foundation, stairs, and fireplace. All that remains are the fireplace ruins. This reminds us that from the start, Montreat has embraced the rustic revival tradition of using natural materials in its buildings and grounds. Stop 5 is called bridges, and there's a lot of different bridges around. Rock and river rock was used on many landscape features in Montreat, such as retaining walls, bridges, footbridges, outdoor fireplaces, and flower pots and road signs. Around 1923, the use of cobblestones for landscape features began when Anderson solicited funds from Mrs. C.E. Graham of Greenville, South Carolina, to build 2 concrete bridges below the lake, one just below the lake and the other in front of the new auditorium. Rock and river rock were often used for small footbridges as well, at walkways, as well as many a cottage garden or over small creeks and branches which flow throughout Montreat. Part of the reason also for the tour of stones is not just to point out the various stone buildings and stone features, but to give you an awareness so that, because there's plenty around that it's not actually on the tour. Stop number 4 is called flower pots. Almost directly across from the softball field on Assembly Drive, there are 5 interesting rock columns about 3 to 4 feet in height. Generally, these are assumed that it's assumed that they were built and used as flower planters, although it is exactly not clear exactly what their purpose was. One is single and is currently being used as a planter, while the other 4 flank 2 driveways and appear not to have been used for years as anything other than decoration. All 5 are on properties immediately adjacent to one another. This I added from the tour book. Looking at them, I surmise that they were built as gate posts, marking the driveway entrances to each cottage. Even the single one is adjacent to a driveway, suggesting that there had been another one on the other side of the drive that has not survived. Probably dating from the time of Montreat's cottage building era in the 1920s, these 5 planters are most interesting. Another landscape feature that often used cobblestone were the outdoor fireplaces that were and are in many of the cottage gardens. These outdoor fireplaces function as grills for cooking outdoors, as well as functioning as fire pits where cottagers could gather around a warm fire for outdoor entertaining. Stop number 6 is spillways and dams. In the spring of 1924, Mr. Allen Graham of Greenville, South Carolina, and his wife, Mrs. C.E. Graham, and his mother, Mrs. C.E. Graham, gave $25,000 with which to build a new concrete dam and bridge to replace the old wooden dam forming what is now Lake Susan, which had been patched and limping along since the big flood of 1916. The new lake formed by the new and enlarged dam at the request of Mrs. C.E. Graham was named Lake Susan, for, as R.C. Anderson recalls, Mrs. Graham's name was Susan, her daughter's name was Susan, her mother's name was Susan, and her granddaughter's name was Susan. And my wife's name was Susan. Although the dam was primarily built of cast reinforced concrete, cobblestones were used to line the ends of the wing wall buttresses that supported it, as well as used extensively for the stone walls, which were built to enclose the edges of the enlarged lake. A new dam has since been built replacing this 1924 dam, which was damaged during a 1940 flood, using flat field stones for facing. However, remnants of the cobblestone walls surrounding the lake remain to this day. And actually the colored photograph on the right, you'll see that's actually a remnant of the old wing wall for the original 1920 dam. See, it has river rock. Stop number 7 is the Assembly Inn. The old Montreat Hotel was destroyed by fire in January 1924. In the fall of 1924, the trustees of the Mountain Retreat Association instructed the executive committee to launch a campaign to raise $20,000 and begin work on building a new hotel. Asheville architect William J. East turned Reverend Anderson's sketches into the construction and engineering drawings. Construction on the new hotel named Assembly Inn began in 1926. The hotel was, quote, built of Montreat stone cobblestone with large columns rising from the base to the top of the roof, 4 stories. The lower and upper lobbies and the dining room were finished on the interior with scrap marble floors, giving a mosaic effect. With mica flint rock, quartz, cyanite, and other beautiful stone in the interior, giving a warm, colorful, and pleasing effect within. All partitions between rooms were built of hollow tile with no wood, excepting the doors. The cost of the building was approximately $225,000. The furnishings and heating system cost approximately $75,000. The construction was so monumental that it required an immense amount of concrete and stone. As Anderson later records, about 55 carloads of cement were used in stone without limit. The cobblestone was especially troublesome. This is important, as the amount needed to clad the exterior was so great that soon all the cobblestones in the grounds seemed to be exhausted. But wisely, Anderson solved the problem quickly, as he later recalled. The valves in the dam forming the lake were opened and the water rushed down the stream for a mile to the lower boundary of the grounds, and the rushing current of the water washed up as much of the cobblestone as we had in the beginning. This process was repeated whenever the supply of cobblestone was exhausted. Two railway carloads of marble pieces were donated by 2 separate yards in Knoxville, Tennessee, with Montreat only having to pay for shipping. And they were used on the floors, the marble chips. Construction of the Assembly Inn took just over 3 years, and on May 15, 1929, the inn was officially opened to a full house. Stop number 8, the left bank building and walkway. In the spring of 1925, work had begun on the construction of a new committee building and stone footbridge at the head of Lake Susan. The funds for construction were provided by various executive committees or departments of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian denomination. The building would first be known as the Lakeside Building and functioned to house a bookstore and meeting and summer office spaces for the denominational committees. The Lakeside Building was built with large wraparound 2-story stone-pillared verandas, which provided a cool respite from the summer sun, overlooking Lake Susan. On this building, we see the blending of stone with large rubble stone used for the stone veranda posts and cobblestone for the cladding of the body of the building. The effective blending of stone is most visible in the arched entrance portico, where rubble stone is used for the posts up to the rail height on the second-story veranda, where instead of using wood posts to extend to the gabled roof, as on other veranda posts, the post and gabled end wall is clad with cobblestone. Another River Rock feature is its accompanying stone footbridge, which provided a convenient and picturesque way not only to enter the building from either side of the lake, but also as a shorter way to get from one side of the lake to the other. The building has recently undergone a major renovation, resulting in the building's name now changed to the Catherine and Thomas Belk Center at Left Bank. Stop number 9, Howerton Hall. On December 28, 1945, a fire quickly consumed the old wood-framed Alba Hotel at Montreat. Construction of the new replacement hotel, which was named Howerton Hall after Dr. J.R. Howerton, a former president of Montreat, who was responsible for building the original Alba Hotel in 1907, was begun in the summer of 1946. A photo taken during construction of the new hotel shows how the unique round cobblestone columns were constructed. Looking at the photo, it appears that the columns were built in small vertical sections using a round wooden form made of small strips of wood formed into a circle, much like building a barrel, except that every other stave was omitted. The cobblestones were laid in cement, 1 layer thick, in a circle lining the inner edges of the form, and then the center was filled with concrete reinforced with steel rebar. Fraught with fundraising difficulties and urgencies of other needed projects, Howerton Hall was not completed, quote, and opened until 1950. However, the building was neither ever used as a hotel, nor was it ever completed, as only one of the 3-story wings at each end was completed, with the wing on the south only finished to 1 story. Just to note that both rubble rock and river rock were used on this building, and that this was the last, that's 1946, this was the last institutional building of that era in Montreat to use the river rock cobblestones. Stop number 10. I can design buildings, but I can't work a computer. Stop number 10 is Gaither Hall. Anderson's building campaign came to a long pause after the completion of the Assembly Inn, as the Great Depression hit in into the 1930s. This also marked the ebbing of the use of river rock for Montreat's institutional buildings. After some financial wrangling, Gaither Hall was built with a $60,000 donation from Mrs. R.C. Anderson, Dr. Anderson's wife, in exchange for the Mountain Retreat Association paying off the debt on Assembly Inn through its earnings. Gaither Hall was named for Mrs. R.C. Anderson's parents, whose name was Gaither, of course. Construction began in 1935 and was completed in 1942. The building was to be used for conferences in the summer and by the college during the winter. The chapel was used for church services on Sundays year-round. The plans for the building provided for a laboratory, a library, 13 classrooms, a chapel with seating capacity for 600, 2 offices, a book room, library, we would say, and a large fireplace, a fireproof vault. Dr. Anderson was very proud of the fact that the material for Gaither Hall were almost all at a local production. The stone was taken from the Montreat grounds. No river rock, however, was used on this building. However, the stone was taken from the Montreat grounds. Rubble field stone was used for the exterior cladding, while garnet mica schist stone with its flecks of shiny mica were used for the interior walls, just as had been used on the Assembly Inn, built a few years earlier. Three other rock buildings were built at Montreat during this era, but they were not built of river rock. But I wanted to point them out because they're right behind Gaither Hall, and if you want to go up and look at them, it wouldn't be too far off the tour. And they include College, or now called McGregor Hall, in 1935, the World Fellowship Building, 1938, and the Infirmary, which was built in 1942. Stop 11, the Way Out Building. In the fall of 1924, construction began on a new building for the summer use of the Executive Committee of Foreign Missions. The building was named the Richardson Foreign Missions Building, with funds donated by Mrs. L. Richardson of Greensboro, North Carolina, as a memorial to her husband, the late L. Richardson. That's what Mr. Anderson said. Well, it turns out that L. Richardson was Lunsford Richardson of Greensboro, North Carolina, famous as a druggist who had invented and manufactured a line of pharmaceutical products, all under the brand name of Vicks, in which all of the products included as their main ingredient menthol, a new and little-known drug from Japan. His best-selling and most famous product was, and I believe still is, Vicks Vapor Rub. Dr. Anderson himself recalled that the building was designed by an architect from Greenville to be a wooden structure. But we persuaded Mrs. Richardson to allow us to build instead stone building with asbestos roofing, and certain modifications were made to the original plan. Just as an architect, I have to say that Mr. Anderson liked to build his own buildings. Anyhow, but in the case of the Way Out building, I think it was definitely an improvement. This handsome stone building, as Anderson described it, which is still standing, but now named the Way Out building, shows that Anderson had made a wise decision to build using cobblestones, as not only has it stood the test of time, but it eloquently displays the decorative and attractive effect that can be achieved with the use of cobblestones. Actually, that's my favorite building, Montreat. The last stop is where you're sitting, the Presbyterian Heritage Center. The Reverend Dr. Samuel Mills Tenney, 1871 to 1939, started collecting historical materials related to the Presbyterian Church at the turn of the 20th century. In 1902, he discovered papers in Houston, Texas, at a bookstore from Robert Dabney, and decided to start the Presbyterian Heritage Society of the Synod of Texas. In 1925, there had been a concerted effort to get the society recognized by the Presbyterian Church in the United States and to find it a home. That year, Tenney used a home at the First Texarkana Bank as a repository for its collection of documents, photographs, and records. But then the 1926 General Assembly approved the establishment of the Historical Foundation of the Presbyterian and Reformed Churches, and in 1927 agreed to move the collection to Montreat, which it offered free rent for the Historical Foundation space, about 1,000 square feet in the basement of Assembly Inn. Although funds for a new building, in 1939, the Reverend Thomas U. Spence, Jr., took over the curator-director for the Historical Foundation after Tenney's death. Spence would serve in this capacity until 1969. Although funds for a new building for the Historical Foundation were authorized by the Presbyterian General Assembly in 1946, construction of a new building lagged on for almost a decade, until 1954 when construction finally began. According to local historians Joe and Mary Standard, the rubble rock used for the exterior cladding of the building was obtained from the building of the 4-lane Highway 70, which was then being constructed from Old Fort to Ridgecrest. In 1983, when the Presbyterian Church merged with the UPCNA to form the Presbyterian Church USA, the Historical Foundation became part of the Presbyterian Historical Society, which is headquartered in Philadelphia. After several years of debate and discussion, the 217th General Assembly voted to close the Montreat facility for cost savings, which was completed at the end of 2006. The General Assembly asked the Friends of the Historical Foundation, the Montreat Conference Center, and Columbia Theological Seminary to create a historical presence in Montreat. The Presbyterian Heritage Center at Montreat is at historical presence, a learning center both on-site and online highlighting Presbyterian history and Reformed heritage, all the church's tradition, a worldwide mission, and an interesting role. It has an interesting role in Montreat. The River Rock tradition of Buncombe County and Montreat was mostly a phenomenon of the 1920s, with a few lingering examples into the 1930s and 40s. There are perhaps numerous reasons why the trend died out, but my guess is that the three major reasons are the limited supply of local cobblestones and river rock, the extensive labor cost for procuring and laying the stones. Not everybody in the county had the advantage of opening the dam to get cobblestones. And I think even at that, I believe that they ran out here at Montreat as well. And so it was extensive to both gather them and lay the river rock. And also just a change in architectural taste. However, the rubble rock continued and is continuing to be a signature building tradition at Montreat. The most recent example is the new Montreat Town Hall, which used both rock and river rock for its exterior cladding. The use of stone floors on the interior also reflects the continuing rock building tradition of Montreat. I have only highlighted a few examples of the rock and river rock tradition in Montreat, and in addition to encouraging you to take the tour of stones with its 13 stops, I further encourage you to thoroughly read about and investigate on your own the many more examples presented in the tour book, If These Stones Could Talk.
Yes.